morning and a very warm welcome to all of you. It's our pleasure to have and good fortune to have well-distinguished Agri expert with us as our panelist, and we'll have an interesting conversation with them about future of Agri. The face of Agri has been changing very rapidly and suddenly, and Agri is looking promising, very, very promising than ever before. On the demand side, we are seeing that the demand is increasing every year, and main driver for demand is population. And the only one target India in next 10 years will certainly achieve is the population. And with the increase in the population, rising income, rising affluence, we are seeing demand for proteins and value-added products is increasing. And what's happening on the supply side? Supply side, the same old issues. The arable land is coming down. The water availability is almost 40% lower than what it used to be. The quality of the seed is relatively poor. The inadequate usage of fertilizers and crop care product. Linkages between center of production and consumptions are very poor. As a result, the productivity in India is one of the lowest. It is almost 1/3 or 1/5 of the global best in different crops. But the good news is, in spite of that, in last 5 years, we have seen some structural changes in Agri, and government has been focusing in rural employment, has been focusing in rural development, and as a result, there is a lot of money which is available at the bottom of pyramid. Also, the increase in the land prices has created wealth in the rural economy, and we are at an interesting cusp. So let's understand from our panelists today, what is going to be future of Agri? So my first question is to the panel. 60 crore people are dependent on Agri directly. Their lives and aspirations are connected with Agri. How do you see a secular, structural and sustainable growth Agri in next 10 years?
Girish, and good morning to all of you. I think it's a very wide and open question that he has posed. Yes, there are 60 crore people which are dependent on agriculture for their livelihood and their sustenance. I think that my first point is that the market for food, both nationally and internationally, is growing. India, given its vast arable land of 140 million hectares and cropping intensity of roughly 1.3, 1.4, I think has a lot to offer to this growing food basket. While population grows at around 1.4, 1.5%, agriculture in the last decade has grown at 3.5, 4%, which is almost twice or more than twice the rate of population growth. I think the changes which started happening from 2005, 2006 in the world food system with rising prices has brought back the attention of the policymakers, the investors, the businessmen, and of course the farmers back to this business. I think the biggest thing that will be required in India is that I think we have far too many people dependent on agriculture. I think that as the rest of the economy grows, that has to come down. I think there is no other country in the world which has this kind of population dependent only on agriculture. Second issue which I think is more structural is this whole issue of land ownership laws in this country. While informally there are a lot of consolidation is taking place, but I think that will need some sort of legal sanction for farms to become bigger, farms to get more mechanized, and that mechanization I think is a structural change which will happen, because while we have 60 crore people, but today you travel around the countryside and you talk to farmers, the biggest complaint that they have is that there is not enough farm labor available to do their operations. One can lay the blame on Narega, or one can say that the migration of construction labor to city centers is much faster than it can absorb. But the fact is that the very tough and laborious work that farms need, I think the labor is not willing today to do that kind of a work which is required. For example, paddy transplanting requires 10, 12 people to work through the day to transplant 1 acre in a day. You can do the same thing with machines. You can do 6 or 7 acres with 2 people. So that's a kind of a productivity increase that is possible. I think these changes will come about, and I think those are the opportunities which exist. So I think that's what I have overall to say on agriculture.
So when we look at India and compare it with our operations elsewhere, let's say we are present in about 65 other countries, we find that India has a clear competitive advantage in, let's say, the dairy sector. We are now the largest producer of milk in the country, and it is growing at a very fast clip actually. So yesterday they reported 140 million tons of production, and in no time I think it has climbed up from 100 to 140 million tons. So I think dairy is one clear sector. I think the whole apparel piece, the whole textile piece, I would say, is one where increasingly the competitive advantage is shifting towards India. China is moving up the value chain, and they are not finding it worthwhile to participate in some parts of the textile value chain now. And we can clearly see that in the lower part of the value chain, work is shifting to places like India and Bangladesh. Fruits and vegetables, certain segments of fruits and vegetables, we can clearly see that India is gaining a competitive advantage. I think tomatoes and potatoes, some fruits, there are clear pointers to India catching up with, let's say, China or certain other countries in terms of cost of production and productivity. Then in all the plantation crops, I think India has still competitive advantage in terms of cost of production. So when we look at spices, the entire spices processing piece, I think India is the spices factory of the world. So we see a lot of advantage which India still retains. Cashew and coffee, we feel that still India has competitive advantage, but it is losing over the last few years. So these are some of the sectors which, given our experience, we can see that India has country competitive advantage.
I think one of the biggest problems that we've been facing is the overwhelming focus on wheat and rice, which now in the last, say, decade, government has started moving away from, but not enough, not really yet. In some of the crops that Sanjay is mentioning, specifically fruit, you know, I know being a fruit farmer myself and a processor, the processing is not happening fast enough. So even though we had this huge national horticulture mission, we are with the promise of, you know, developing that sector in a huge way over the last decade and going forward. Yes, you are seeing an increase in the quantity, but still the processing is so minuscule, and that's really where the focus is going to have to be over the decades to come. It has to be a processing-based economy, where we're processing barely 5% of our fruit or something like that. Less than 5%, and if you take the US as an example, of course the most extreme example, we're talking 95% is processed. So that gap between 5 and 95 is a huge challenge and an amazing opportunity.
Next question, Sanjay. Recently we have seen a spurt in the strategic and financial investors in getting into agri space. Abu Dhabi's Al Dahra has invested into Kohinoor Foods. Qatar's Hassad Food, they have invested into Bush Foods. Temasek invested into Godrej Agrovet. We at IDFC, we have invested into Parag Milk and Star Agri warehousing. So what has happened? Why this sudden spurt in last 3 years into agri?
So let's look at the complete fruit and agri value chain. We typically in our system, we divide it into 5 parts. Mm-hmm. So we have the agri inputs piece, then we have the upstream piece, which is the farming and plantations. Then we have the trade and logistics piece. Then we move on to the midstream processing, which is going beyond primary processing. And then you have the downstream piece, which is the brand and distribution piece. Our experience is that in India, most of the investment is coming into the downstream side. So which is the consumer facing side, yeah. Because most of the companies are today, quite, I would say, enamored by the consumption growth story which is happening. Mm-hmm. So you see a lot of investment coming in the QSR piece. Right. You see a lot of some investments coming in the branded, low road branded commodities piece, which is you mentioned about the recent investment in the basmati sector. Right. Then there have been some investments in the spices processing. Right. So not the real high-end, more value-added parts, right. But on the commodities side. Right. Then we have some investments which obviously have been historically coming into value-added consumer products. So this is where we have seen most of the investments coming in. In agri inputs, there is hardly any notable investment which one can really identify. On the upstream part, the government policies do not allow any investments. Trade and logistics, there have been some investments, but it's the midstream piece and what Rajiv was mentioning. Any investment which would link farm to factories or farm to markets, whether local or global, I see very little investment coming in that midstream processing piece, because that's the most difficult part, and that requires the front end to really fire, which means that the consumer product part has to really fire, and then this piece can dovetail that growth story, which is currently not happening as emphatically as it ought to.
Rajiv, my next question is to you. Recently with falling rupee, we have seen there's a huge agri processes, like there's skim milk powder we have seen is getting exported, and as a result the domestic milk prices have increased from 20 rupees to 27 rupees just in 3 months. So what do you see the opportunities for exports of agri produce and foods, and what would be the ramification on the Indian market because of that?
So for sure, in the case of commodities, there are going to be huge ramifications, and you're probably going to see a surge in exports if the government allows it. Because, right. Of course, I mean, look at onions. Yeah. Immediately that the onion price reaches something, boom, there's an order banning exports. Not always totally fair to the farmers, because at the end of the day, you have the agriculture markets, the mandi barons who are really making the profits here, and one way or the other they win and the farmer always loses, is my experience in it. So you're going to have this food inflation for sure. Exports are going to boom in this space. A little bit more difficult for branded goods, because there you have to create a brand. So if you talk about wine, for example, definitely we have an opportunity, but it's a specific wine. You got to go talk about the story, and you still got to sell it. It's not that, okay, this is rice of this quality and this specification, and you grow it, we grow it, and now I'm giving you a better price. Right. But because so much of our agriculture is still very much commodities, we're not really doing the downstream processing. We're doing really still a very basic processing. To do skim milk powder is really one of the first stages of processing with no branding required. All of those unbranded commodities, there's going to be a surge in exports, and it is going to definitely lead to price inflation here.
So Kapil and Sanjay, there is a limited technological intervention in agri, but whenever it has happened, let's take a case of BT cotton. India used to be the largest importer of cotton, has in 10 years become largest importer of cotton, exporter of cotton, right? So the technology intervention can really change the productivity and landscape, bring a lot of efficiency. Do you see any opportunities here?
Yeah, I think a lot of, whatever agricultural productivity, if you look back from the Green Revolution days of mid-60s and 70s, every time there is a technological innovation on the seed side, it has led to a surge in production and productivity. I think the next surge is going to be led more by the markets the consumers, because that's what is changing in India very fast. If you look back 10 years ago, the quality of fruits and vegetables which were available in Indian fruit and vegetable shops or roadside vendors or fruit and vegetable markets, that's undergoing a change. In every big city today, you have air-conditioned fruit and vegetable shops which are coming up. A lot of fruits, vegetables around, fruits are especially are getting imported. So I think that is going to change. So I think big opportunities will really come in technological innovations on the agri value chain modernization. The entire food chain from farm to market has remained primarily under the government control, highly regulated APMC acts, etc., etc. That I think is going to see a major change, and that's where I think technology, both ICT as well as refrigeration, controlled atmospheres, etc., storage, all that is going to add value. But on the farm, again, we will see, I think, farm mechanization, delivery of farm mechanization services. That's going to be a big driver as far as farm productivity is concerned. Farm productivity in India, you have wide ranges. You have states and districts which have world-class productivity or best in the world, and you also have areas which have very low productivity. So I think there is a lot of scope still to increase production, both for domestic consumption as well as for exports. So I think technological innovations will happen on both ends of the value chain. Sanjay?
So these changes are pretty gradual. One has been observing the landscape for quite some time, for the last so many years. But if one has to point out the areas where technology could be used more extensively, I see farm mechanization is one area where I think there's a crying need.
Sure.
But unfortunately, it is not coming up because it requires innovation, very localized innovation, and which is very, very customized for Indian conditions. So I think that innovation ought to happen, because with the shortage of labor and the cost going up, I think that arbitrage is going away. We are very clearly seeing that arbitrage is going away, and there is a need there. Another area where I see adoption of technology is this whole power generation, biomass-based cogeneration of power.
Sure.
I think there is so much of biomass which is generated in India, which is still not being converted into power, and the potential there is huge. Wherever we are running agri operations, we find that that is one area where definitely a lot of investment can come in, and the policy environment is also pretty conducive there. So that is two, and I think the third area could be storage, where the quality of storage can go up drastically, including silos. So that's where technology can come in.
I have a point here. Looking at grapes, where there's huge mechanization in countries like Australia, the US, Chile. You hardly see any hand harvesting done there anymore, for example. Given our policies here, I just don't see any level of mechanization coming in, apart from, small tractors. I mean, something really basic. But as far as actually getting a mechanized harvester, for example, it's just not going to happen, because you have land laws. Individuals can't own more than 20 hectares of land. If it's irrigated, it can't be more than 10 hectares, 15 hectares. And then you see fragmentation occurring, because, no new money can come in. If you're not a so-called agriculturist, you're not allowed to buy land. If you're a corporate, you have to go through bloody hell to try to acquire land. It is so skewed, and in such a short-sighted, stupid way, I would say. I mean, sorry to use the word, but what was necessary just after independence, given the zamindari, given the fact that you had a lot of landless people, and it was very skewed, it was very feudal. I think in 2013 the time has come to totally reconsider that and do away with these silly policies that you have to be an agriculturist to buy land, and you can't consolidate land. Today the farmer knows exactly what his land is worth. If his land is worth 50 lakhs an acre, he's not going to sell it to you for 49. You're not going to be able to make a fool out of him. And let's allow this to now go into the formal economy. Let's allow people to consolidate some land, and let's allow mechanization to happen. Otherwise, you're always going to be stuck with food inflation and totally outdated practices as far as the farm itself is concerned.
Sanjay, we are seeing, by beginning of next year, we'll see a lot of new banks coming in, and the microfinance and business correspondence models are trying to take institutional finance to the farmers. We hope that in this process, more money and more credit will be available to the agri sector at a decent interest rates. And do you see this happening, or this is going to be on the paper and it's a very long haul? What do you think?
Well, this is something which I observe from a distance, so wouldn't have very intimate knowledge. But I would say that most of the new players are private bankers, and I wouldn't say that they would be very generous in lending credit like some of the public sector banks are. When I see the behavior of private sector players in this space, I think they try and link again farmers to strong institutions, which are food processing companies or retail formats. And wherever they are able to find these linkages, and they are able to create structures which de-risk them from defaults, I think they have built up their businesses in this space. So that linkage is very important.
I think that's a very good point. That's exactly the kind of arrangement that we have with our bankers, HDFC Bank, and our farmers. So we've linked up about 150 farmers with them, but we are the crucial link, where we guarantee that we are going to be picking up their grapes, and so the whole thing becomes a tight circle. Without that, these farmers find it so difficult to get credit above a certain amount. I mean, there's a lot of avenues. You have your local cooperative, agri cooperative bank, up to 3 lakhs, 5 lakhs an acre, no problem at all. But if you want to do something a little bit more ambitious than that, they just can't get credit.
I'll just add, Girish, because we run a network of retail outlets in Andhra and Karnataka, and we've started doing a pilot for agri credit through our centers. I think the biggest hurdle is that not many banks are willing to come forward, because I think most of the private banks are looking at the sort of top end of the clientele rather than go down to the rural areas. Size of their offerings, I mean, the loans will be very small to service such loans, to do credit appraisals, etc. And we have run a pilot with Axis Bank, and I must say that it's been actually very successful, because last 1 year we have seen almost 99% farmers coming back and paying their loans and taking again the loans. And they are buying agricultural inputs. The only difference that we made is that it's linked to using agricultural inputs. So it's not pure consumption credit kind of a thing, which up to 1 lakh rupees in Andhra is available to every farmer without any collateral, without any this thing. And these credits are also given without collaterals. And we are finding it that farmers are not bad credits, and if you use technology, we're using biometrics, and we're using all kind of electronic transfer of funds and credit appraisals, etc. All is done mechanical through mobile phones and through internet. So that entire thing is working quite well. But there is a need for more people to come into that space, and that only will bring down the total costs of reaching out to these people, because cost of reaching for any bank to farmer customers will be very, very high. And that, if aggregation happens, I think that's the only way that it can move forward. But it's a big, big opportunity out there.
Can I just interrupt? I just want to appeal to somebody to please turn this air conditioning down. I've asked like 3 times. It's 15 degrees here and you're turning us into ice cubes. Please, if somebody can turn down this air conditioning.
One of the leading agri pesticides company, and Rajiv, you must be also using crop care products, right? But still we see in India the crop care products of old vintage, red triangle products. They have could have some health issues with the farmers and the consumers. And this position has not changed significantly in last while, and we have not seen new products coming from Indian crop care product companies. These are the old products in some formulations. How do you see this landscape changing?
It's incredible to me how dangerous the environment is right now, and the amount of chemicals and bad chemicals that are used completely indiscriminately. One of the big problems is that our agriculture universities have no funds. So the funding comes from who? Basically from the companies who want to sell these agriculture graduates their products after they graduate and join corporate farms or their own farms or whatever. So you have funding from all these guys telling them to just spray the shit out of, excuse my language, out of whatever it is they're growing. And you know, the funny thing is, we look at the same chemical that's used in Australia and in India, and if you look on the directions on the box or in the literature, the recommended dose in India is 3 times what it is in Australia. Now in Australia, they have very strict rules on pesticide residue, you know, everything is very controlled. Here, we have 0. I have yet to have any government official come to us and say, what are your pesticide residues? These are the rules. There are no rules. I can't believe now in 2013, we're talking about FDA, we're talking about FSSAI. Where are the rules for a simple pesticide residue in your tomatoes or in your grapes that are sold in your market? 0 rules. Am I unaware of something maybe? And so as long as government doesn't regulate that, which is a real crying necessity today for them to do it, these companies are going to go ahead and sell products that have been banned or are hardly being used in other countries, but the formulations are cheaper, and they have a place to dump it. With full apologies to those who are selling the good stuff as well, but unfortunately there's too much of this going on. And until government steps in, starts doing regulation, and we have more people like Sunita Narayan, perhaps, people like that raising the alarm, it's a long road ahead. I mean, I'm still always shocked whenever I visit our farmers, and we are always trying to get them to reduce the amount and come into line with international usage, but it's a very long road ahead.
I think in terms of, I agree with Rajiv that on the pesticide use and food safety regulations in terms of residues, I think there is a crying need for those regulations to come. There is also a crying need for, I think, agrochemical companies to educate farmers on the right ways of using these chemicals, so that they take care in terms of when to use, how to use, and when to stop using. To your specific questions of new molecules and innovations in this sector, I think I don't think that any of the Indian companies have the resources to invest in developing a molecule which today costs anything between $250 to $400 million for discovering one molecule. I think that piece is only being done by the multinationals, whether it is Syngentas of the world or Bayers of the world, and they have also moved their research more on biotechnology rather than on new molecule research. So I think we are going to see less and less of new chemistry coming into this, but a lot more emphasis will be on farm practices which will reduce the pest load. The biotechnology is going to be a big differentiator in this, which will eliminate the use of pesticides altogether, as we have seen some of the pesticide which came down in terms of usage when BT cotton came into India. So I think stopping BT food in India or BT seeds in India, I think itself is not a very healthy thing for government to do, but I think the whole issue has been made so emotional that even the government doesn't know which way to go. But technologically, I think that's one big solution which will reduce the usage of pesticide as such. But one trend which is also gaining now more and more traction is the development of biopesticides, neem-based formulations or other biocontrol measures. I think those are the things which will happen. But red triangle products, I think all responsible companies are taking off their list slowly. And that, I think, in very short time will be thing of the past. I don't think they will remain. So you will have molecules which require maybe 30, 40 grams to be applied for an acre to deliver similar type of protection. So I think the trend will be in that direction.
So let me take some questions from the audience. What are the current challenges faced by large buyers engaged in contract farming? This question is from Vikram Kanya. Maybe Rajiv, you could be the right person to answer this.
Sure. When you're dealing with farmers, of course, they're not used to, for the most part, dealing with legal contracts and, living by a sort of a professional standard. So that takes its time for sure. But what we found is, when we started out, we had a simple one-page contract. It just said, okay, you'll deliver us the grapes and we'll pay you this within so many days. And that was pretty much our contract. Now it's more like an 8-page contract, very specific terms, talking about when the pruning has to happen and the kind of composition that is in the grapes. And you know what, the farmers get it. At the end of the day, you have to educate them. So every year you have to have, sessions, conferences with them, explain to them why we're doing each one of them. And it's becoming more and more usual. They're getting more and more used to it, especially in the case where the processor is buying directly from the farmers. Where you still have the old system where they are delivering whatever to the mandis, that's never going to, I just don't see when that's ever going to get professionalized, very unfortunately. But it's a matter of them learning to trust you, which does take a few years. It's not so simple that you can set up something that's processing and immediately start signing contracts with farmers. You have to prove yourself for at least a couple of years. You're probably going to have to do things a little bit more on their terms for those few years until you prove yourself, until they know that they can depend on you and depend on their payment to come at the end of the season. And then, for sure, you can move in a more and more professional manner.
Sanjay, there's one question for you. What are the opportunities for bulk storage and food grains from importer and exporter's point of view?
So in our experience, I think one is the whole government piece. So FCI is hugely, they are short of storage space in a big way. All across Punjab, Haryana, UP, wherever their procurement network is very well spread out. So that's one piece, and they are coming out with viability gap funding based projects. Of course, there are issues in recovery of that viability gap funding from the government, but they have been coming out with tenders, and that is one of the larger opportunities which is there. Then the second opportunity is port-based infrastructure. All the new ports which have come up, let's say barring Kandla or JNPT, in almost all the ports, godown infrastructure is pretty poor and highly inadequate. Godowns are also of very poor quality. So port-based infrastructure, storage infrastructure is something where definitely there are investments which are already coming in, and it will continue to pull a lot of more investments in the coming years.
There's one question from Srinath. It's about the insurance of crops for short-term and medium-term has been challenged. So any opportunities here or anything can be done?
So I have an answer here that it requires a fair amount of work between the government, the banks, and the processors to come up with these insurance schemes. In the case of grapes, in the case of wine grapes, for instance, we have been quite successful in persuading the Maharashtra state government with the support of the agriculture minister to come up with quite a sophisticated insurance scheme that's been quite successful for the past couple of years and now covers thousands of grape farmers. But it really needs initiative from industry because farmers are not really sophisticated enough to approach the banks and get this done. So it really needs industry to be a driver, but I think you're going to see it happening more and more and in a more sophisticated manner. I hope so.
There's one question on what is outlook on cold chain, logistic and infrastructure. Kapil or Sanjay?
Cold chain is, I mean, there are clearly areas in the fruit and vegetable processing part where cold chain infrastructure is clearly an area where there is low investment. So that's something which is there, which is a clear area where investment is quite low.
Also, I think another area which hasn't really played out in India is the small, cold storages at the farmer's end. And that's where I think when the land laws change or the land consolidation begins to happen, because next wave of productivity will also be dependent on how the farms are getting organized, whether it's the producer companies by bringing together the farmers or farming cooperatives, which haven't been very successful so far. I think those are the kind of drivers which will need those small storage, because the wastages of fruits and vegetables can be brought down to bare minimum only if you put them into the cold chain within 1 or 2 hours of plucking. And that field heat removal immediately is very critical for maintaining the quality of fresh fruits and vegetables. So I think that area will need some innovations as well as some, that I think is a great opportunity to grow.
Raju, this is another question for you. What are the biggest impediments to starting a food processing unit, and which are the specific areas you would recommend to an entrepreneur to get into?
One of the biggest impediments is for regular fruits and vegetables, not something as specific as wine grapes, which cannot be eaten, and so it's specifically for the wine industry, is that you have to deal with this whole APMC system. So the first thing you got to do is to be able to get around that and assure your supply of raw material at at a predictable, stable rate. I think you gentlemen would agree with me that this is one of the biggest problems that anyone would face when they're trying to get into this. Now, if you can get over that hurdle, and there are ways, you pay a fee now, and you can get certain things, but still, it's not 100% right. Then the next stage is, look, it's easy. There are different stages of processing. There's very basic processing, like we were talking about skim milk powder, where you just have to put up a little machinery in a shed and do it. Those products have very low margins because it's very easy to duplicate, very low barriers for entry. So really what you want to do is something at the end of the day where you're creating a brand. And then it's not going to be only about the processing part of it. In fact, that will become almost secondary at some point. And it's going to become creating a brand that connects with the consumer, fighting for shelf space, getting your product out there. Just shelf space today in modern retail is a battlefield. So you really have to, I mean, there's a big part to this whole jigsaw puzzle that you have to put together, and processing is just one part of it. But processing does start with getting over this APMC issue.
The future of Agri is really great. Anything which can bring productivity improvement, efficiency improvement, reduce wastages, connect center of production to center of consumption, and bring mechanization of farming and technological intervention should really work well. And with this, I would like to request all of you to give a big round of applause to the panel for sharing them.